Princess and tried to stop Prince Harry from marrying Meghan, but he didn't listen, and now the monarchy is paying the price. In a bombshell revelation shaking the royal establishment, Princess Anne has finally broken her silence, admitting she warned her nephew, Prince Harry, not to marry Meghan Markle. Her exact words? "I advised him not to marry her." But her warning was ignored. What did he see that others didn't? Why did Harry brush off one of the most respected voices in the royal family? And how did this ignored advice spiral into the chaos we see today, from explosive interviews to leaked recordings and royal fallout? In this special investigation, we uncover the private conversation that could have changed everything and why it's only now coming to light. Stay with us. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. What if one of the most stoic and respected members of the British royal family had seen the writing on the wall long before the rest of the world? What if, behind palace doors and beneath the public veneer of royal unity, a warning was quietly issued and ultimately ignored? This is not a fairy tale or the start of a royal conspiracy theory. It's a revelation that is shaking the monarchy's foundations once more. According to newly surfaced claims, Princess Anne, the often underappreciated but deeply committed daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, did not remain silent in the lead-up to one of the most controversial royal marriages in recent memory. In fact, she allegedly issued a clear and direct warning to her nephew, Prince Harry, advising him not to marry Meghan Markle. But her words, it seems, fell on deaf ears. This is the story of a warning unheeded, a royal fracture deepened, and the quiet storm that Princess Anne tried to stop before it ever began. For decades, Princess Anne has lived largely outside of the tabloid drama that has surrounded her brothers, nephews, and other royal family members. Known for her no-nonsense demeanor, unyielding work ethic, and a sharp tongue rarely heard but always remembered, and has long been considered the royal family's most quietly influential member. She has neither chased headlines nor been the focus of scandals, and yet her role behind the scenes, especially as the monarchy evolved through some of its most challenging years, cannot be understated. According to sources close to the palace and friends of the royal family, and saw red flags in Meghan Markle early on. She reportedly voiced her concerns in private, well before the lavish royal wedding captivated the world in 2018. She wasn't rude, they say, nor was she disrespectful. She was simply honest. And in an institution where tradition and caution are sacrosanct, honesty, especially the type that risks offending someone new to the royal inner circle, is not always welcomed, and is said to have approached Harry out of love, not disdain. In her eyes, this wasn't about class, race, or an aversion to outsiders, as some critics might assume. It was about compatibility, character, and the weighty implications of entering royal life. She knew what was at stake, not just for the monarchy but for Harry himself. And more importantly, she may have known how easily things could spiral if the wrong person joined the firm. The irony is thick. As Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's relationship progressed, and especially after their dramatic departure from royal duties in 2020, dubbed Megxit by the media, many royal observers, critics, and even former staffers began to point out the signs they claimed were always there. Tensions with staff, accusations of bullying and manipulation, the infamous Oprah Winfrey interview, and a public narrative that painted the royal family as cold and callous while elevating Harry and Meghan to the status of victims and truth-tellers. These events cracked open a royal mystery that continues to evolve. And now, years later, we're learning that someone may have tried to prevent all of this before it happened. The person? Not the late Queen Elizabeth, not King Charles, not Prince William, but Princess Anne. The revelation comes from a source who claims to have been present during one of several private conversations between Princess Anne and Prince Harry. The source, who has remained anonymous due to security concerns and personal loyalty to the family, stated that Anne sat Harry down months before his engagement was officially announced. She didn't mince words. She expressed doubts, concerns, and a pointed belief that Meghan was not the right fit. Not for the royal family, and not for Harry. But Harry, already enchanted and possibly already feeling misunderstood within his own institution, chose not to listen. It is this moment, according to insiders, that marked the quiet beginning of a deeper divide between Harry and some of his relatives. Not because of the advice itself, but because of the reaction to it. Harry, it seems, saw the warning not as guidance from a loving aunt, but as judgment from a system he was already growing weary of. This only deepened his sense of alienation, driving him closer to Meghan and further from those who tried to protect him from what they feared would be a catastrophic match. Why didn't Harry listen? That question, echoed in whispering tones among royal watchers and even among palace aides, is central to this unfolding drama. Was it love? Rebellion? A desperate need to forge his own path? Or perhaps it was a combination of all three. What's certain is that the path he chose, while initially hailed as modern and refreshing, has become one of the most divisive in the history of the royal family. And for her part, never went public with her thoughts. True to her character, she remained silent, dignified, and dutiful, even as the royal family endured scathing interviews, explosive documentaries, and damning accusations, and continued her public engagements with quiet resolve. But those close to her say that the recent revelations have stirred something within her, perhaps not anger or frustration, but vindication. The story is more than just a royal "I told you so." It is a window into how the most seasoned members of the monarchy view their role, not as passive figureheads, but as stewards of continuity and protectors of tradition. Anne's warning was not issued out of fear of change. It was, according to those familiar with her mindset, a calculated, sincere attempt to protect her family from a future she could already see playing out in her mind's eye. And now, years later, with the royal family more divided than ever, and with public opinion swinging like a pendulum with every new interview or statement from Montecito, her words carry a weight they never did before, because they weren't uttered in front of cameras or under the glare of international headlines. They were spoken in confidence, quietly, thoughtfully, and now, with the benefit of hindsight, perhaps prophetically. This introduction serves not merely to tease a story of palace intrigue and personal conflict. It opens a door into the inner workings of a family that has, for centuries, balanced public duty with private tension. And it challenges the viewer to reconsider what they know, or think they know, about one of the most talked about royal romances in modern history. Was Meghan Markle truly misunderstood and mistreated by the monarchy? Or did she simply clash with a system that was trying to protect itself from disruption? Was Harry a victim of a cold institution, or the architect of his own discontent? And, more critically, what role did Anne's unheeded warning play in all of it? As we dive deeper into this story, we will unpack the history, explore the relationships, dissect the key moments that led to this royal schism, and examine the consequences of ignoring the quiet voice of reason that may have offered the last clear chance to avoid a royal unraveling. The next sections will take you inside the corridors of Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and even Frogmore Cottage, to reveal the moments that changed the course of royal history forever. But it all starts here with a warning issued in love, and a future reshaped by the choice to ignore it. In the centuries-old story of the British monarchy, where kings and queens often dominate the spotlight, few figures have quietly embodied the institution's values as consistently as Princess Anne. The only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, and Elizabeth Alice Louise was born into a life of extraordinary duty, but carved her own path with a mixture of discipline, resolve, and a remarkable indifference to public adulation. She has never sought headlines or basked in the glow of public adoration, and yet those who know the inner workings of the royal household consistently speak of, and as the royal family's bedrock. In order to understand the gravity of her alleged warning to Prince Harry, one must first understand who Princess Anne truly is, and why her judgment holds such quiet power within the House of Windsor. From her earliest days, Anne distinguished herself from her more flamboyant siblings. While Charles was groomed for the throne, Andrew for naval glory, and Edward for artistic endeavors and ceremonial roles, and gravitated toward hard work and privacy. As a young woman, she developed a reputation for being blunt, direct, and refreshingly unaffected by her royal status. She was never one to play the part of a pampered princess. She competed as an Olympic equestrian, traveling with little fanfare, and becoming the first royal to compete in the games. Her passion for horses was not a passing hobby, it was a metaphor for her life, disciplined, rigorous, and driven by a personal standard rather than public validation. By her 20s, Anne had already solidified her role as one of the monarchy's most reliable figures. She became the patron of more than 300 organizations, traveling tirelessly and often in economically modest ways, sometimes even flying commercial or staying in modest accommodations during royal engagements. This was not out of frugality but from principle. For Anne, royal life was about service, not spectacle. And in this belief, she was more aligned with her late father Prince Philip than almost anyone else in the family. It's no surprise, then, that and became one of Queen Elizabeth II's most trusted confidants. While others often wrestled with the burdens and expectations of royal duty and never wavered. She rarely complained, almost never courted controversy, and kept her private life private. Even through the dissolution of her first marriage to Mark Phillips, she maintained grace and composure, avoiding the tabloid storm that so frequently engulfed her brothers and their children. Her stoicism and steadfastness made her not just respected, but in many circles, revered. It is this context that makes her alleged conversation with Prince Harry all the more remarkable, and does not give advice lightly. She does not interfere in matters she considers outside her purview. If she chose to speak to Harry about Meghan Markle, it would not have been on a whim or driven by emotion. It would have been deliberate, thoughtful, and rooted in her deep understanding of both the royal family and the intense pressures that come with being a part of it. Reports from insiders suggest that Anne's concerns were not about Meghan's background, career, or nationality, superficial markers often cited by critics who accuse the palace of failing to embrace modernity. Rather, Anne's unease is said to have stemmed from character assessments, based on her observations of Meghan's demeanor, her behavior in private settings, and her early interactions with royal staff and family members. According to one former courtier, Anne noticed inconsistencies in how Meghan presented herself. She was charming, articulate, and confident in public, but allegedly demanding and impatient behind closed doors. There were whispers of tension with long-standing royal aides, clashes over protocol, and a reluctance to adapt to the rigid expectations of royal life. And, ever the realist, recognized that royal duty is not glamorous. It is demanding, restrictive, and requires a type of emotional resilience and humility that few truly possess. For Anne, the red flags were not about Meghan as an individual but about the institution she was entering. She reportedly feared that Meghan did not fully comprehend or respect the sacrifices that royal life required. In private conversations with family members, and expressed concern that Meghan viewed her marriage into the royal family not as a solemn vow to service, but as a platform. This distinction, subtle but profound, set off internal alarm bells for her, and who had spent her life avoiding exactly that kind of perception. The alleged warning to Prince Harry was delivered months before he proposed. Insiders claim it was not a confrontation, but a heart-to-heart, a rare moment of vulnerability from a woman known for her guarded nature. And, it is said, told Harry that marrying Meghan would come with consequences, not just for him, but for the monarchy. She warned that Meghan's charisma and confidence, while strengths in the entertainment world, might prove combustible within the cloistered and ceremonial world of the royal family. More importantly, and cautioned that if Meghan ever felt confined or criticized by the institution, she might rebel in ways that would damage the monarchy's fragile public image. Harry, however, reportedly did not take the advice well. Sources close to the family say that Harry viewed Anne's concerns through a personal lens, interpreting them as dismissive of Meghan's heritage, ambition, and independence. It is said that he felt protective of Meghan, who was already facing scrutiny from certain corners of the British press, and believed that Anne was simply echoing a sentiment that Meghan would never be accepted. This reaction reportedly upset Anne, who had hoped her concerns would be considered with the seriousness they deserved. Over time, this disagreement contributed to the slow, painful erosion of Harry's relationship with some members of his family. He began to retreat further into his world with Meghan, building emotional walls that once didn't exist. His bond with Anne, once warm and full of familial respect, grew cold and distant. While Anne never publicly commented on the matter, those within the palace walls noticed the shift. In the years that followed, Anne's prediction began to materialize. Meghan struggled with the constraints of royal protocol, clashed with royal staff, and ultimately decided, with Harry, to step back from royal duties altogether. The decision, formalized in 2020, rocked the monarchy. It was not just the departure of a beloved prince and his new wife. It was a rupture in the continuity of the royal narrative, an act of defiance against centuries of tradition. And, observers say, watched it all unfold with quiet resignation. She did not express vindication, nor did she gloat. That has never been her way. But those close to her say she was deeply saddened, not just by the family's fracture, but by the lost opportunity to guide Harry onto a path of stability and purpose within the royal fold. There is something uniquely tragic about the dynamic between Anne and Harry. Both are fiercely loyal in their own way. Both have struggled with the burdens of being royal, though, and managed it by embracing duty while Harry tried to redefine it, and believed in the monarchy's long game, the notion that sacrifice today ensures stability tomorrow. Harry, on the other hand, grew to believe that stability at the cost of personal happiness was a price too high. And so, they drifted apart, not because of a single conversation or a harsh judgment, but because they represented two different worldviews, one rooted in tradition, the other in transformation. In many ways, Anne's unheeded warning stands as a symbol of that division, a voice of tradition, trying to prevent a future that has now become reality. This section sets the stage for a deeper dive into the events that followed. The next chapter will examine the early stages of Meghan's integration into royal life, her clashes with staff, and how these early warning signs validated Anne's initial concerns. When Meghan Markle officially entered the royal orbit, she did so with a whirlwind of enthusiasm and media coverage that even seasoned royal observers hadn't quite anticipated. For the British monarchy, an institution often viewed as archaic and resistant to change, Meghan represented something new, vibrant, and unapologetically modern. A biracial American actress with a career of her own, Meghan brought an outsider's perspective to a family that historically operated as a self-contained system of privilege, tradition, and deeply ingrained codes of conduct. At first glance, it all seemed like a fairy tale. Prince Harry, long considered the monarchy's most restless and unpredictable member, appeared rejuvenated. Meghan's poise and charisma drew comparisons to Princess Diana, and for a brief time, the British press appeared captivated by the glamour of it all. Headlines praised her fashion sense, her philanthropy, and the couple's undeniable chemistry. But behind palace gates, things were unfolding quite differently. Even before their wedding in May 2018, murmurs began circulating among palace staff that Meghan was struggling, or perhaps refusing, to adapt to royal expectations. Unlike Catherine, the Princess of Wales, who had spent nearly a decade gradually preparing for her role alongside Prince William, Meghan was thrust into the royal spotlight with barely a year of transition. Royal insiders later claimed that Meghan's Hollywood sensibilities clashed with the understated, reserved demeanor expected of royal family members. It wasn't that Meghan was rude or inappropriate, they said, but that she fundamentally didn't understand or respect the invisible boundaries that governed royal life. In particular, her relationship with the royal household staff began to fray almost immediately. These staffers, many of whom had dedicated their entire professional lives to serving the monarchy, operated within a rigid chain of command. Their responsibilities went far beyond arranging flowers or scheduling appearances. They acted as cultural interpreters of royal life, advising family members on everything from speech tone to protocol nuances. Meghan, reportedly, bypassed them. According to several insiders who later spoke to media outlets under conditions of anonymity, Meghan would issue directives that contradicted protocol, change plans without approval, and demand swift turnarounds that palace staffers found impossible given the traditionally slow, bureaucratic nature of royal planning. The issue wasn't simply efficiency, it was authority. Meghan was seen, by some, as unwilling to learn the system before trying to change it. One former palace aide reportedly described the situation as trying to rewrite a play before reading the script. Tensions quickly escalated during the preparations for the royal wedding. The incident that leaked into the press involved a now infamous disagreement between Meghan and Catherine over bridesmaid dresses, specifically one worn by Princess Charlotte. While the media initially reported that Meghan made Catherine cry, Meghan later stated in an interview that the reverse was true, that Catherine had made her cry, and later apologized. What was never fully discussed, however, were the events leading up to the altercation. According to multiple sources, the argument symbolized a deeper issue: Meghan's insistence on creative control and Catherine's role as a traditionalist who believed royal events must follow strict conventions. Behind closed doors, staff members described that period as fraught with high emotion, last-minute changes, and a general sense of unpredictability. These behind-the-scenes challenges were further compounded by Meghan's different approach to public engagements. As a former actress and global activist, Meghan was used to engaging with crowds, speaking off-script, and expressing opinions freely. While this openness was praised by some as refreshing, others within the palace found it jarring. Meghan would often discuss topics that senior royals had traditionally avoided: race, gender, mental health, with a tone and candor that unsettled some traditionalists. For an institution that survived by revealing as little as possible, Meghan's willingness to speak her mind was both admired and feared. It was around this time that allegations of bullying began to surface, though they remained behind closed doors for months. A number of aides, including longtime staff members, quietly resigned or requested transfers. Some cited stress. Others spoke vaguely of differences in management style, but the pattern was hard to ignore. In early 2021, just before Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview, the Times of London reported that a former aide had filed a formal complaint in 2018, alleging that Meghan's behavior had created a toxic work environment. The claims included episodes where staff members were allegedly reduced to tears and felt humiliated. The palace initially declined to comment in detail, launching an internal review but insisting that they took all staff concerns seriously. Meghan's spokesperson denied the allegations, suggesting they were part of a calculated smear campaign aimed at discrediting her ahead of the Oprah interview. The timing of the report did raise questions, but those familiar with the inner workings of the palace insisted that the issues went back far earlier and were known by several senior royals, including Princess Anne. According to one high-ranking former advisor, and had noticed early on how Meghan interacted with staff during family gatherings and joint events. She reportedly observed a certain coldness or transactional tone in Meghan's conversations with aides. While not overtly disrespectful and believed Meghan treated royal service staff more like Hollywood employees than institutional guardians. This difference in perception was critical. In Hollywood, assistants and managers are part of a personal brand. In the palace, staff members are gatekeepers to centuries of tradition, and, crucially, not meant to be publicly seen or credited. This growing disconnect created a quiet panic behind the scenes. At a time when the monarchy was already under immense scrutiny, from Brexit-induced division to questions about its relevance in the 21st century. Having a new duchess who appeared unwilling or unable to function within the expected norms was a risk. The palace attempted to manage this friction privately, hoping that time and mentoring would soften the sharp edges. But Meghan, by all accounts, saw the resistance as unjust and, worse, discriminatory. Meanwhile, Harry grew more entrenched in his support for Meghan. Friends of the prince say he viewed any criticism of her as part of a wider pattern of royal resistance to change. He began to take a more adversarial stance in meetings, reportedly challenging his father's advisors and clashing with Prince William over how Meghan was being treated. Their brotherly bond, once so evident in public appearances and light-hearted interviews, began to fray. William, some insiders claim, echoed many of Anne's concerns, albeit more cautiously. He didn't question Meghan's intelligence or character, but he reportedly worried that she did not see the royal role as a collective endeavor. He believed she was forging her own path without understanding the institutional consequences. The tension reached a tipping point during the couple's tour of Australia in 2018. Publicly, it was a success. Meghan's speech about women's rights received global acclaim, and the couple appeared relaxed and energized. Privately, however, palace aides described chaos. Meghan reportedly grew frustrated with the schedule, clashed with handlers, and insisted on changing appearances with minimal notice. Staff morale, which had already begun to suffer, took a sharp dip. It was during this period that senior royals, particularly and Charles, allegedly held private conversations about the need for a reassessment of roles. Some proposed increasing support for Harry and Meghan, while others floated the idea of limiting their public presence until tensions eased. What united everyone, however, was a growing sense that something was spiraling out of control. The energy that Meghan brought was potent but unstable, and the internal cracks it exposed were widening. This environment, tense, divided, and increasingly unmanageable, set the stage for what would become known as Megxit. But long before the bombshell exit was announced, those within the family, including Princess Anne, had already witnessed the warning signs. The failed assimilation, the communication breakdowns, the staff departures, the growing mistrust between brothers, all of it pointed to a storm on the horizon. In retrospect, Meghan's entrance into the royal family was a catalyst for long-overdue conversations about race, modernity, and the burdens of public service. But in the moment, those conversations were wrapped in confusion, resentment, and silence. For Anne and others who had spent a lifetime navigating the unspoken rules of royal life, it was a turning point. The system, they realized, could no longer absorb or contain what Meghan represented. This section concludes with the growing internal divisions within the royal family and the professional implosions that made Anne's earlier warning not just relevant, but hauntingly prophetic. The exact moment Princess and confronted Meghan Markle is difficult to trace, buried as it was beneath layers of palace protocol and years of silence enforced by institutional discretion. Yet, among those closest to the royal family, whispers of an intense private conversation, one that changed the course of royal history, have become impossible to ignore. According to sources close to the matter, the confrontation unfolded in the months following Harry and Meghan's wedding, but before their bombshell decision to step away from their royal duties. The setting was neither formal nor theatrical. It took place during a private family gathering at Balmoral Castle, a location long regarded as sacred royal ground. Nestled in the Scottish Highlands, Balmoral is where the royal family goes to retreat, away from public eyes, media scrutiny, and official obligations. It is the one place where royals are said to speak more freely, surrounded by extended family, long-standing traditions, and a deep sense of privacy. It is also a place where, historically, tensions are addressed, not through public statements, but in hushed, direct conversations that ripple through the family like shockwaves, and had reportedly grown increasingly agitated by what she viewed as Meghan's unwillingness to learn or accept the structure of royal life. To her, Meghan was not simply new, she was combative, unwilling to listen, and disturbingly confident in her belief that the institution needed to evolve around her rather than the other way around. And the daughter of Queen Elizabeth II had spent her entire life walking a delicate line between duty and invisibility. She understood the weight of the crown not as a glamorous burden, but as a quiet obligation passed down through generations. It was, to her, sacred. Meghan, she believed, treated it like a stage. The conversation began innocuously, and approached Meghan in one of the castle's drawing rooms, away from the broader family crowd. At first, the tone was measured, and asked how Meghan was adjusting. She inquired about her feelings toward the growing responsibilities, her sense of place within the family, and whether she had any concerns. Meghan, confident and articulate, responded in her usual way, calm, polished, and clear. She spoke about the challenges of adapting, the sense of isolation, the suffocating scrutiny from the press, and her desire to modernize the role she had inherited. It was then that, and, according to insiders, dropped her carefully constructed veneer. What followed was a brutal, unfiltered message delivered with all the gravity of someone who had spent her life observing how the royal system either absorbs or ejects those who defy it. You don't understand what this is, and reportedly said, and if you don't understand it, you can't respect it. And if you can't respect it, you don't belong here. The words stunned Meghan. According to one account, she stood silently for several seconds, processing the sharpness of Anne's tone. It was not an emotional outburst, and wasn't angry or shouting. She was deliberate, precise. To Meghan, however, it felt like a warning cloaked in disdain. Meghan reportedly responded by defending her efforts, arguing that her perspective was valuable, that the monarchy needed to change, and that she believed she could help bring it into the modern age. And shook her head. "This isn't Hollywood," she allegedly replied. "You're not playing a role. You're taking on a legacy. That crown will not bend for you." The intensity of that moment lingered long after the conversation ended. Meghan left the room visibly shaken, according to one member of the household staff. Harry, upon hearing what had transpired, was furious. He believed his aunt had overstepped, that she had belittled his wife, and failed to show her the respect she deserved. And didn't apologize. She reportedly told her brother Charles, and possibly even the Queen herself, that she had said what needed to be said. It wasn't cruelty, she insisted, it was clarity. Someone had to explain to Meghan that being royal wasn't about transformation. It was about submission to duty, to protocol, to the invisible weight of tradition. For Anne, this was not personal animosity. She had watched others enter the family over the decades, some with grace, some with struggle, but all eventually either adapted or stepped aside. Meghan, she believed, was doing neither. She was insisting on reshaping the monarchy in her image, and saw this not as boldness but as hubris. And while others in the family were still trying to manage the situation diplomatically, and chose to confront it head-on. The fallout from that conversation was immediate, if not publicly visible. Meghan reportedly told Harry that she felt alienated and unwelcome. She began to see, and as part of the inner circle determined to undermine her. This cemented her belief that the royal family, or at least key parts of it, were not only unwilling to accept her but actively resistant to her presence. It deepened her sense of isolation, and it hardened Harry's resolve to defend her at all costs. In private, the family became divided into camps. Some, including William and Catherine, quietly supported Anne's concerns, even if they wouldn't have voiced them so bluntly. Others, like Charles, tried to play peacemaker, concerned more about the optics of division than the roots of it. The Queen, always measured, reportedly encouraged calm and time. She believed that storms, even royal ones, could pass if met with enough grace and patience. But even she couldn't ignore the shift. From that point forward, something had changed irreversibly. The tension seeped into every corner of royal life. Public appearances became tightly choreographed affairs, with Meghan often appearing radiant and composed, but increasingly guarded. Harry's interactions with his family grew colder, particularly with his brother. Behind the smiles and carefully curated photos, resentment brewed. Insiders claimed that and felt vindicated by what unfolded in the months after. The media turned sharply on Meghan. Stories emerged about staff resignations, leaked emails, tense meetings, and demands that clashed with centuries-old traditions. While and never publicly commented, those close to her said she believed Meghan's struggles were not born from bias, but from misunderstanding, one that Meghan refused to acknowledge. Anne's critics, however, saw her position as inflexible, even elitist. They argued that her loyalty to tradition blinded her to the genuine pain and alienation Meghan was experiencing. That debate, between respect for tradition and the need for evolution, became the core of the royal family struggle. It was no longer about one person's behavior or another's values. It was a cultural collision playing out at the highest level, in full view of the public and behind walls no longer capable of containing scandal. The confrontation at Balmoral was not simply a disagreement. It was a prophecy, and had issued a warning that Meghan was not equipped, or perhaps not willing, to accept the life she had stepped into. And while many hoped that the situation could still be salvaged, the seeds of departure had been sown. From that moment on, it was only a matter of time. In the days that followed Princess Anne's confrontation with Meghan Markle at Balmoral, the once serene Scottish estate turned into an emotional crucible. While outwardly the family maintained appearances, attending church services, walking the grounds, and gathering for meals behind closed doors, tensions beneath the surface had reached an unprecedented boiling point. A decades-old system built on silence and stoicism was beginning to splinter under the weight of unspoken resentments and conflicting worldviews. The fallout didn't explode in the form of public arguments or screaming matches. That would have violated every tenet of royal behavior. Instead, it unfolded in glances, in the sudden coldness of interactions, and in the shifting alliances among family members. According to a former aide familiar with the atmosphere, Balmoral had never felt more divided. The estate that had once been the Queen's place of retreat now felt like a political minefield, every hallway echoing with uncertainty. For Meghan, the confrontation with Anne was not just insulting, it was defining. She had already endured a brutal wave of British media scrutiny, accusations of staff mistreatment, and whispered speculation about her suitability as a duchess. But now, she had been confronted face-to-face by a senior royal who openly questioned her right to be there at all. To Meghan, it solidified what she had long feared, that she was not only unwelcome but viewed as an existential threat to the institution itself. Sources close to the Duchess revealed that after returning from Balmoral, Meghan withdrew further into herself. Her interactions with palace aides became even more transactional. Her trust in the system, never strong to begin with, evaporated. She confided in Harry that she no longer believed she would ever be accepted, not by the press, not by the public, and certainly not by the senior royals. In her view, Anne's confrontation was not an isolated act of concern, but a representative message from the core of the monarchy. It was the royal family speaking through its most stoic and uncompromising figure. Harry, meanwhile, was wrestling with a storm of conflicting emotions. His loyalty to his wife was absolute, but his love for his family had not disappeared. He believed that many of them, including Anne, simply didn't understand Meghan, or perhaps didn't want to. What frustrated him most was the refusal to see the modern world for what it had become. The monarchy, he argued, had to evolve to survive. Meghan, in his eyes, was not a problem but an opportunity. But to Anne and others, she was a risk. According to internal sources, Harry requested a private meeting with his father, Prince Charles, shortly after Balmoral. He hoped to serve as a bridge, to explain that what Meghan needed wasn't rejection or correction, but compassion. Charles, ever the diplomat, listened patiently. He understood Harry's pain, but his primary concern remained the long-term stability of the monarchy. He urged patience. He asked Harry to give it time. But to Harry, time had already run out. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, found herself in an increasingly delicate position. As someone who had slowly and methodically earned her place within the royal structure, she understood both sides. She sympathized with Meghan's adjustment difficulties but also shared Anne's belief in the importance of hierarchy and quiet duty. Over the years, she had become adept at navigating palace politics, but the chasm between the Sussexes and the rest of the family was widening beyond repair. Private discussions among senior aides became more frequent and more urgent. There were concerns not just about personal relationships, but about long-term damage to the crown's reputation. With the press picking up more frequent whispers of discontent, and with royal watchers noting Meghan and Harry's increasing isolation, the palace was entering crisis mode. What few people realized at the time was that the events set in motion at Balmoral would soon lead to a series of decisions that would rock the monarchy to its core. Meghan and Harry began to explore the idea of stepping back, not entirely at first, but enough to regain control of their lives. They discussed splitting their time between the UK and North America. They spoke about becoming financially independent. They even floated the idea of continuing their work under the royal brand, while having more freedom to speak out on social issues. This hybrid model was seen by Meghan as a way forward, a compromise between total severance and total submission. But to many inside the royal household, it was a non-starter. The monarchy did not operate on half measures. You were either in or out. And, in particular, was reportedly furious at the idea. She saw it as a dangerous precedent that would erode the foundations of duty and responsibility. If Harry and Meghan were allowed to chart their own course while still carrying royal titles and using taxpayer-funded security, it would undermine every other member of the family. When the news of Meghan and Harry's intentions finally reached the Queen, she called an emergency summit, an unprecedented meeting at Sandringham known now as the Sandringham Summit. Attended by the Queen, Charles, William, and Harry, the meeting aimed to find a solution to a crisis that had spun out of control. Meghan did not attend in person, opting to remain in Canada with Archie, but she participated through discussions beforehand. It was during this meeting that the lines became irreversible. The Queen, deeply saddened but clear-minded, laid out the non-negotiables. You could not be half royal. The institution had survived for centuries by being rigid in times of pressure. Emotional appeals, modern branding strategies, and media engagement would not change that. Harry left the meeting knowing that the bridge had burned. There was no middle ground. Either he and Meghan would remain within the royal fold, fully subject to its rules and scrutiny, or they would step away entirely. He chose the latter. The palace issued a statement that evening. It was clinical, restrained, and deeply formal. It acknowledged the couple's departure, stripped them of their HRH titles, and made clear they would no longer represent the Queen in any official capacity. While the wording was carefully chosen to avoid scandal, those within the family knew the truth, and warning had come to pass. The Queen's aides began quietly circulating talking points to the press. The narrative, shaped delicately, was that Harry and Meghan had made a choice for personal freedom. But behind closed doors, several senior royals blamed Meghan for the split. And chief among them, she believed that Meghan had not only misunderstood her role but had willfully destroyed it. That the Duchess of Sussex had entered a sacred institution not with humility, but with ambition. In the weeks that followed, Meghan and Harry began building their new life. They relocated to California, signed major media deals, and launched their own foundation. But the emotional cost of their decision became more apparent with each passing month. Their relationships with Harry's family grew colder. Communication was minimal, strained, and mediated through aides. Events like the Queen's death and King Charles's coronation brought the family back into the same rooms, but the warmth was gone. For Anne, the confrontation at Balmoral remained a private moment, one she never spoke of publicly. She continued her royal duties with quiet discipline, her schedule as full as ever. But those close to her say she carried the pain of the family rupture deeply. Not because she regretted speaking the truth, but because the institution she had dedicated her life to had been permanently altered. Even now, years later, the impact of that moment reverberates across the monarchy. The exit of Meghan and Harry created a blueprint, an uncomfortable one, for what happens when the modern world collides with the royal one. For Anne, it was never about race, or personality, or even popularity. It was about duty, and whether someone could embrace it fully. She made her judgment, and the consequences played out for the entire world to see. The revelation did not come with a whisper. It came with a bang that echoed through every corridor of Buckingham Palace, shattering whatever fragile peace had remained following Harry and Meghan's exit from the royal family. What began as an anonymous tip to a small but aggressive tabloid ignited a media wildfire when the existence of a secret recording was confirmed. The voice on the tape, allegedly Meghan Markle's, made direct, unfiltered, and explosive comments about Queen Elizabeth II. Comments that, if proven genuine, represented an unprecedented betrayal and a turning point in modern royal history. The leak was not accidental. It was a targeted act, released with surgical precision at a time when public sympathy for the monarchy was beginning to rally after a difficult few years. The Queen, though physically frailier in her final years, was emotionally stronger than ever, having served as the monarch through war, political upheaval, and relentless personal tragedy. But this tape, a few minutes of audio allegedly recorded during a private phone call, struck at the very heart of her legacy. The audio, according to multiple sources familiar with its content, featured a female voice bearing a striking resemblance to Meghan's, speaking with visible agitation and frustration. What made it particularly incendiary was the directness of the language used. There were no euphemisms or cautious diplomatic terms. The speaker referred to the Queen as an outdated symbol and said she needed to be handled before she completely ruins the brand. At one point, the voice suggested that certain actions would be taken to ensure silence if matters escalated. The media was initially hesitant. Given the gravity of the accusation and the potential for deep legal repercussions, no mainstream outlet wanted to be the first to run the story. But the file had already leaked to fringe online forums, where amateur sleuths dissected the voice pattern, comparing it to hours of Meghan's interviews, speeches, and public appearances. Sound experts chimed in, some dismissing it as AI-generated fakery, others affirming a high probability of authenticity. Then came the shocking twist. Princess Anne's name surfaced as the source of the leak. According to a whistleblower within the palace's communications team, it was Anne who had kept a copy of the recording. Obtained through back channels and safeguarded after being informed of its contents shortly after Meghan and Harry's departure. And, ever the pragmatist, had chosen not to act on the audio at the time, believing the monarchy had already suffered enough public damage. But following what she saw as repeated provocations, interviews, podcasts, and a controversial docuseries, she changed her mind. And, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and commitment to the crown, believed that the public had a right to understand the extent of the rift. In her view, the monarchy had endured months of character assassinations in silence. Enough was enough. She quietly authorized a trusted confidant to share the tape with a journalist known for discretion and integrity. The plan was not to destroy Meghan, but to rebalance a narrative that had tilted dangerously far in one direction. Within hours of the leak, Buckingham Palace issued a statement that was both vague and thunderous in its implications. It acknowledged that unauthorized communications had been made public and that the palace was reviewing the matter internally with the utmost seriousness. It did not confirm or deny the authenticity of the audio, but royal watchers immediately recognized the language as code for crisis mode. Inside the palace, a war room was assembled. Charles, now king, summoned his most trusted advisors. William took the lead in strategizing public response, while Anne, resolute in her decision, stood by her actions without apology. She offered to publicly address the leak if needed, but her blunt nature was considered too risky. Instead, the family leaned on a more subtle approach, dignified silence paired with calculated visibility. Every member of the royal family was instructed to be seen at charity events, church services, military ceremonies. The message was clear: duty continues, no matter the scandal. But behind closed doors, fury reigned. Meghan and Harry were blindsided. The Sussex camp initially refused to comment, but then shifted to aggressive legal posturing. Their representatives called the tape a fabrication, manipulated audio, and an appalling smear campaign. However, they stopped short of directly accusing any individual royal of orchestrating the release. Legal teams on both sides braced for war. Letters were exchanged. Private investigators began to dig into the origins of the file. Meghan reportedly considered filing lawsuits against multiple outlets, but hesitated when advised that doing so would require forensic analysis and potentially confirmation of her voice. What complicated matters further was the content of the tape. While it never included outright threats of violence, the tone and choice of words shocked even those familiar with the cutthroat nature of palace politics. The speaker, widely believed to be Meghan, suggested that the monarchy's refusal to modernize would result in implosion from within. There were vague references to stories that could be told and documents that would force the public to choose sides. It was not the language of reconciliation. It was the language of leverage. For Queen Elizabeth II, the scandal emerged during her twilight months. Although officially the palace downplayed her reaction, insiders say the betrayal cut deep. The Queen, known for her stoicism, was devastated by the notion that someone she had once welcomed into the fold with grace could speak about her in such terms. In one particularly poignant detail leaked later by a royal aide, the Queen allegedly remarked during a private tea, "I knew she was ambitious. I didn't know she was dangerous." Public reaction was as divided as ever. Meghan's supporters decried the leak as an invasion of privacy and questioned the timing of its release. Was this retribution for the Oprah interview? For the docuseries? For daring to speak out against centuries of colonial and classist oppression? Meanwhile, traditionalists saw the tape as confirmation of their worst fears. To them, it wasn't about race or change, it was about loyalty. And loyalty, they argued, was sacred. Amid the chaos, William's stance hardened. Already deeply wounded by his brother's departure and the surrounding accusations, this latest betrayal crystallized his resolve. According to palace insiders, William privately told his father that he would no longer entertain reconciliation efforts. The bridge had not only burned, it had been reduced to ash. He vowed that his children would be protected from the drama and that the monarchy would endure, even if it meant cutting off ties completely. The media, sensing blood in the water, launched full-scale investigations. Former palace staffers were tracked down. Off-the-record sources spoke of explosive rows behind palace walls, of shouting matches between aides, of nights when Meghan wept from exhaustion and paranoia. Yet, others described a woman singularly focused on her mission, determined to remake the royal narrative in a more progressive image, even if it meant shattering the one that had come before. Charles, caught between fatherhood and kingship, chose silence. He did not condemn Meghan, nor did he defend her. His focus remained on preserving the institution and ensuring that the Queen's legacy would not be defined by scandal in her final chapter. When asked by a foreign diplomat during a state visit whether the family would sue, Charles reportedly smiled and replied, "The crown does not litigate. It endures." But perhaps the most surprising fallout was the effect on the British public. For decades, the monarchy had relied on a delicate balance of reverence and distance. The public was invited to admire but never to know. But in the age of smartphones, documentaries, and social media, that veil had been torn. People now demanded transparency. They debated the morality of hereditary privilege. They questioned whether institutions built in another century could or should survive in this one. The leaked recording, whether real or fabricated, became a symbol of that debate. It forced a reckoning not just within the palace, but across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. For older generations, it was a tragic footnote to a reign defined by duty. For younger voices, it was a call to interrogate every corner of power. As investigations continued and media scrutiny intensified, Princess Anne remained silent. She did not give interviews, did not release statements, and did not respond to speculation. But those close to her say she did not regret her decision. She believed that monarchy, for all its flaws, deserved honesty, and if that meant letting the public hear what had been said in private, so be it. The fallout was far from over. New documents began to surface. Old allies chose sides. And somewhere, behind closed doors, the royal family prepared for what would come next, because in the world of crowns and secrets, there is always a next chapter. The royal scandal that unfolded on British soil did not stay confined within the walls of the United Kingdom. As soon as the leaked audio allegedly featuring Meghan Markle's voice made its way into the public domain, reactions began to reverberate from Washington to Wellington, from Ottawa to Nairobi. It wasn't just a royal family matter anymore. It was a global event with political implications, cultural significance, and seismic effects on diplomatic relations and public discourse. Within hours, social media became a battlefield. Hashtags like #MeghanExposed and #JusticeForTheQueen trended alongside #RoyalSetup and #WeStandWithMeghan. Influencers, activists, politicians, and journalists across the globe began weighing in on the explosive recording. The internet, already primed for royal intrigue following years of Harry and Meghan's tell-all moments, had found its newest obsession. But unlike previous episodes where sympathy for the couple flowed freely, this time, the waters were murkier. One of the most immediate reactions came from the United States, Meghan's home turf. American media had largely supported her during previous disputes with the monarchy, painting her as a modern woman challenging a rigid institution. But the leaked audio changed the tone. Networks that once championed her narrative paused to reconsider. On morning talk shows and late-night panels, pundits debated whether the audio was authentic, and if it was, what it meant about Meghan's intentions. The idea that she may have used threatening language toward a 90-something-year-old monarch was difficult to reconcile with her public persona as a humanitarian and advocate for compassion. CNN and MSNBC aired back-to-back specials exploring the history of royal infighting, while Fox News took a more aggressive stance, referring to the incident as the Megxit meltdown. Even Oprah Winfrey, who had famously interviewed Meghan and Harry in a bombshell special, was reportedly deeply concerned about the implications of the recording. Her production team refused to comment publicly, but an anonymous source from her network said that Oprah felt blindsided by the tone of the leaked tape. The Biden administration, cautious not to interfere in what it considered a British domestic affair, issued no formal statement. However, when asked during a press briefing whether the president had heard the audio, the White House press secretary responded curtly, "We are aware of the situation and have no comment at this time." That silence spoke volumes. Political leaders typically express admiration for the Queen due to her historical and symbolic standing. For Meghan, a naturalized member of that institution, to be heard in such terms, assuming the audio was genuine, presented a diplomatic tightrope no one wanted to walk. In Canada, the reaction was especially emotional. As a member of the Commonwealth and a nation with deep cultural ties to the Crown, many Canadians had admired the Queen's decades of dedication. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who had enjoyed a warm relationship with the Queen during her reign, looked visibly uncomfortable when asked about the recording at a press conference. Her Majesty was deeply respected around the world. "I won't comment on private matters, but I will say that Canadians continue to hold her legacy in high regard." In the Commonwealth nations of Africa and the Caribbean, reactions were more layered. For years, Meghan had been viewed by many in these regions as a symbol of progress, proof that someone with mixed heritage could enter the highest levels of British aristocracy. The recording threatened to shatter that symbol. In Kenya, Ghana, and Nigeria, national newspapers ran editorials questioning the authenticity of the leak, but many also asked hard questions about Meghan's true stance on monarchy, heritage, and colonial legacies. Jamaica, a nation already in the process of debating its future as a constitutional monarchy, saw rapid acceleration of anti-monarchist sentiment. The leaked audio was cited in Parliament as an example of why the institution no longer served the needs or aspirations of post-colonial nations. One member of Parliament stood before the chamber and asked, "If this is how they treat each other in private, why should we believe the Commonwealth has a place for us in the future?" Australia, another key Commonwealth member, also reeled from the implications. Though far removed geographically, the country had its own long history of royal intrigue and had seen previous referendums on cutting ties with the monarchy. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese commented diplomatically, "It's not my place to speculate on internal matters within the British royal family, but I will say the Queen earned the respect of Australians through decades of service." He stopped short of commenting on Meghan or the audio, yet the political undertones were unmistakable. The Vatican, in a rare move, issued a statement emphasizing the importance of respect for elders and the dignity of institutional tradition. While it did not name Meghan or the royal family directly, the timing of the statement suggested that the Church was watching events unfold with concern. Some cardinals spoke more freely, criticizing the alleged tone of the recording as emblematic of a generational disregard for tradition. Meanwhile, European monarchies, like those of Sweden, the Netherlands, and Spain, kept a dignified silence. Unofficially, members of royal households were reportedly appalled. According to a palace insider in Brussels, what shocked many was not just the content of the recording, but the audacity to express such ideas so explicitly about someone like Queen Elizabeth, who was globally revered. In a diplomatic world where words are carefully chosen and traditions maintained with precision, the bluntness of the leaked comments cut deep. Back in the UK, political fallout was immediate and intense. Parliament saw fiery debates as MPs on both sides of the aisle weighed in. Conservative members called for the stripping of Meghan and Harry's titles, citing the tape as grounds for dishonor. Labour MPs were more reserved but expressed concern about the impact of the scandal on the UK's global image. Some argued that the royal family needed a reckoning, transparency, reform, and perhaps even a re-evaluation of its public funding. A petition demanding the removal of the Sussexes' titles gained hundreds of thousands of signatures within days. Scottish National Party leaders seized the opportunity to reiterate calls for independence. This scandal proves that the monarchy is no longer a unifying force for the UK, one MSP argued on national television. In Northern Ireland, where loyalty to the crown remains deeply symbolic to one community and a source of division to another, reactions were predictably polarized. Public protests emerged in London and Edinburgh. Some carried signs reading, "Long live the Queen," others read, "Down with the Windsors." At one particularly intense demonstration outside Kensington Palace, two protest groups clashed before being separated by police. It was clear that the scandal had touched a nerve not just about Meghan, but about the institution as a whole. In the media, analysts began to speak of a potential constitutional crossroads. If the monarchy could be so publicly exposed by its own members, could it continue to serve its traditional role in British life? Or had it become a relic, too fragile for modern transparency? What made matters worse for the monarchy was the timing. The leak coincided with the one-year anniversary of Queen Elizabeth II's death. Events meant to honor her legacy were overshadowed by the recording. Scheduled services at Westminster Abbey and St. George's Chapel went ahead, but attendance dropped, and camera crews hovered not for ceremonial footage but for protest coverage. International charities and organizations affiliated with Meghan began to distance themselves cautiously. One nonprofit quietly scrubbed mentions of her from their website. Another issued a vague statement about reassessing their partnerships in light of recent developments. Meghan, known for her advocacy on issues like women's rights and mental health, found herself suddenly absent from the very conversations she once dominated. Meanwhile, calls for forensic voice analysis grew louder. The royal household reportedly commissioned a private investigation into the tape's authenticity. No official results were shared with the public, but leaks from insiders suggested that voice-matching technology had confirmed a high likelihood of match. Still, the palace maintained its official silence on the matter, refusing to validate or discredit the recording. In private, though, things were far from calm. Charles was said to be furious. William, always protective of the institution, reportedly considered issuing a public statement defending the Queen's legacy. Advisors cautioned restraint, and, though unwavering, felt the weight of global reaction. The move she made to rebalance the narrative had triggered an avalanche. And through it all, Harry remained noticeably quiet. Gone were the fiery defenses, the press statements, the public appearances. In Montecito, he stayed largely off the radar, leaving speculation to swirl. Some said he was furious with Meghan. Others believed he was the one pushing for a lawsuit. Still more suggested he was negotiating behind the scenes, trying to broker a truce with his brother before things escalated further. By the end of the week, it was clear this wasn't just a family matter anymore. It was a geopolitical story, a cultural reckoning, and a constitutional dilemma all rolled into one. The world wasn't just watching, it was taking sides. As global headlines fixated on the now infamous audio leak that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and beyond, the House of Windsor found itself locked in a fierce struggle for survival. The monarchy, an institution revered for centuries and symbolically tied to the very identity of Britain, was reeling, not just from the implications of the recording itself, but from the relentless international scrutiny that followed. Royal courtiers, already accustomed to managing PR crises, realized they were staring down a challenge unlike any before, one that involved digital evidence, global outrage, political undertones, and a betrayal that had festered inside their own bloodline. Behind closed doors, the palace initiated what royal insiders later described as a full-spectrum containment strategy. First, they established a war room of sorts. A high-level crisis command led by senior advisors, including communications directors, legal counsel, and long-trusted confidants of the late Queen. Their objective was clear: protect the legacy of Elizabeth II at all costs while preserving the continuity of the monarchy itself. One of the first orders of business was assessing the authenticity of the audio with an urgency rarely seen in royal circles. Although the palace refrained from making any public confirmation or denial, insiders whispered that top-tier forensic linguists and audio analysts had been discreetly flown in to verify the tape. The results, while not officially disclosed, reportedly left little room for ambiguity. The voice on the tape, chilling in its tone and unmistakable in its American accent, was almost certainly Meghan's. But even that certainty did not bring clarity, because context, motive, and timing were missing. The palace's next move was to shape public perception without directly fueling the fire. That meant leveraging long-standing allies in the British media. While some tabloids had already begun to tear into Meghan with renewed vigor, mainstream outlets like the BBC, The Times, and The Telegraph were approached behind the scenes. The message was not an outright attack, but a gentle redirect. Emphasize the Queen's legacy, focus on the mourning of her loss, and remind the public of the stability King Charles was working to provide. Across front pages and evening bulletins, a campaign of narrative rehabilitation unfolded. Archival footage of Queen Elizabeth interacting with world leaders, meeting with children, comforting survivors of tragedy, and celebrating milestones became central to the coverage. Opinion pieces asked the nation to remember her unshakable commitment to duty. Documentaries that had once aired on quiet weekends were rebroadcast in prime time. It worked to a degree. Older generations, who had grown up with the Queen's image on their stamps and currency, were moved to defend her memory. Letters poured into the palace expressing solidarity and sadness. Yet among younger demographics, the effort met more resistance. Some questioned whether the palace was deflecting rather than confronting. Others insisted that if the monarchy wanted to endure in the modern era, it needed to come clean, address its dysfunctions head-on, and engage transparently. Within royal circles, the fallout became personal. Once mended bridges between the Sussexes and other family members were again reduced to rubble. Prince William, long suspected of harboring resentment toward Harry and Meghan, reportedly severed all remaining private communication. While Kensington Palace issued no public comment, sources close to William described him as feeling betrayed beyond repair. It was not just the content of the leak, but the fact that it dragged their beloved grandmother, already gone, into yet another scandal involving the Sussexes. Princess Anne, whose own role in the leak remained cloaked in ambiguity, was stoic in the face of backlash. She neither confirmed nor denied her involvement, but those close to her noted a marked shift in demeanor, an uptick in official engagements, a renewed presence in public life, and a firm if subtle realignment with King Charles's inner circle. It was as if she had made a choice, not only to defend her mother's memory, but to solidify her place as the monarchy's moral compass. King Charles, meanwhile, bore the burden of leadership during what could only be described as a constitutional crisis. Having spent decades in the shadow of a mother whose reign was defined by restraint and quiet dignity, Charles had entered kingship with aspirations of modernization and relevance. But now he found himself presiding over a family scandal that threatened to eclipse his own coronation narrative. Reports suggested that he convened a series of private meetings with senior advisors, including former Prime Minister Theresa May, known for her discretion and diplomatic skills. The topic was simple but daunting. How does one manage a monarchy in an age of viral audio, fractured family dynamics, and global opinion swings? The answer, it seemed, was twofold: silence and symbolism. Charles adopted a strategy of non-engagement. He made no mention of Meghan or the leak in his public addresses. Instead, he appeared at charities, met with volunteers, and participated in faith-based dialogues across different communities. His goal was to demonstrate continuity, to show that the monarchy could endure storms without stooping to sensationalism. Yet in every photo op and every handshake, the shadow of the recording loomed. As for Meghan, her silence was both deafening and strategic. No official statement was released. No interviews were given. Her team of lawyers, however, was hard at work behind the scenes. Multiple reports confirmed that cease and desist letters had been sent to various outlets that broadcast or republished the audio. Threats of defamation lawsuits emerged. One statement from her legal representation read, "The Duchess of Sussex remains committed to public service and will not dignify unauthorized and potentially manipulated recordings with comment." That line, potentially manipulated, became the fulcrum on which her defense balanced. While no evidence had emerged to suggest the tape was doctored, the possibility remained just vague enough to give her defenders a thread to cling to. Meghan's supporters, especially in the United States, framed the leak as a violation of privacy and an act of targeted harassment. Some media personalities even floated the theory that the leak was part of a coordinated campaign to undermine her growing influence as a philanthropist and public figure. Social media campaigns sprang up in her defense. Influential celebrities, some cautiously, others more boldly, voiced their belief that the leak was unfair, possibly even illegal. Meghan remained out of public view, but her allies were activated. Behind the scenes, calls were made, narratives seeded, and allies courted. What looked like silence was, in fact, preparation for a counteroffensive. Yet even her most loyal supporters could not deny that the tape, if authentic, painted her in a deeply unflattering light. The tone, the language, the implied threats, all contradicted the image she had cultivated. And in the absence of a heartfelt denial or explanation, speculation filled the vacuum. In the days that followed, media outlets turned their attention to potential motives. Why had Meghan made such statements? What context preceded or followed the recording? Analysts speculated that the conversation may have occurred during a particularly tense period in royal negotiations. Perhaps when the Sussexes were being denied security funding, or when their royal roles were being formally removed. Some wondered if the comments were taken out of context, part of a longer conversation about institutional reform rather than personal animus. But without the full audio, no one could say for sure. Meanwhile, the monarchy initiated a quiet recalibration of its public image. Charles approved increased roles for lesser-known royals, hoping to diffuse attention away from the scandal. The Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh took on more patronages. Princess Anne, already viewed as a symbol of duty, doubled down on